terms of security. So when we talk about security, it is very sensitive issue, and we should know what kind of allocation and distribution is given for this budget. So to understand and to learn about the defense budget, we have honorable speakers with us. I welcome you all once again. Now I request Assistant Professor Vinod Sonavne to introduce our speakers. But before that, I would just like to tell you that we are restricted to the time. We have only 1 hour in our hand. So every speaker will be getting at least 10 to 15 minutes to speak. So you should consider this request. Thank you, sir.
Everybody, all the dignitaries, CHME Society officials, good morning. Now I will introduce Dr. Manish Davade, sir. Dr. Manish Davade is founder of the Indian Futures, an independent New Delhi-based think tank on New India and JNU faculty, teaching diplomacy and national security. So now I will request Manish Davade, sir, to carry on the session. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Vinod. A very good morning to all of you. On behalf of again the Central Hindu Military Education Societies, Bhosle Military College, and Kanoji Angre Maritime Research Institute, I welcome you all who are joining us and watching our live stream on different social media like the YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and obviously you all know today's session is on Budget 2023 for Defense Ministry and defense industry. It's very important, and then let me just locate the defense budget, the context in which we are having this very timely and a very significant discussion today morning. It is really about, if you look around and the central issues on national security, defense issues, I think there are two, three things one can immediately sense and flag, which are quite visible. First and foremost, obviously, is the Chinese expansionism, which we have seen in many years through wolf warrior diplomacy, and obviously India, in fact, has been a direct. We have faced a direct consequences of this Chinese aggressive behavior on our borders, be it the western border or even in the eastern border. The number two thing, which I think, which is very important, is the whole question of rising instability in Pakistan and increasingly in collusion on a collusion course with Afghanistan. And obviously, this remains in the larger backdrop of the Pakistani Chinese collusion vis-a-vis India. Very importantly, obviously, the challenge of the Russia-Ukraine war, what it means for what lessons does the Indian defense establishment draw, and then accordingly put out a roadmap for the future. So in that sense, it's very important to understand, especially in the light of the Atmanirbharta mission, which Prime Minister Narendra Modi has embarked on, keeping in mind obviously the earlier COVID impact, and now obviously, as I said, the Russia-Ukraine war. Looking at just a very preliminary look at the defense budget, which was part of the union budget presented on the 1st of Feb. One thing is very crystal clear: on defense issues, the government has its heart in the right place. I will not go into the details of defense budget. Obviously, we have really top minds to do that for us. But I think I'll just point out a couple of highlights. Number one is that the defense gets rupees 5.94 lakh crore in budget 23-24, which is a very important jump of 13% over previous year. The capital outlay pertaining to modernization and infrastructure development of BRO has also seen a significant jump. IDEX, very importantly, sees an enhancement of a whopping 93% over the last year's budget to further foster innovation. And these are in fact, looking at the surface. And to take through all this and really, in a sense, decoding, unpacking the text and the subtext of the defense budget, we have with us, very fortunately, assembled a very stellar cast of India's, finest minds on defense, who in fact bring their innate wisdom and their really rich experience of dealing directly not indirectly but really looking directly at national India's national and defense issues. And I'm very honored that we have with us to begin with as a keynote speaker, Dr. Ajay Kumar, who retired as an IS officer. He has been the ex-secretary in the Ministry of Defense Production 2017 to 19, and later Secretary, Ministry of Defense, Government of India 2019 to 2022. That's a very significant tenure. That's a very significant responsibility which he has held for all these years. So thank you, sir. Truly an honor to have you with us today morning. We also have with us our very own Lieutenant General Virud Khandare, who is in fact the principal advisor to the Defense Secretary now, and had held very important positions in the National Security Council Secretariat, was also the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Truly an honor, Khandare Saab, for really joining us and agreeing to share your ideas on the defense budget. We also have with us Commodore Mukesh Bhargava, retired, and again ex-director L&T Defense. He is also the chairman of the FICCI Defense Technology Committee. I think that's a very important interface between the industry and the government. He has also been also the chairman of CII Marine Systems Committee and the founder director of Defense Innovators and Industry Association. Great, sir, to have you with us today morning. We will also be joined, hopefully, by Advocate Mukesh Bhutani, who is an international figure and a managing partner, BMR Legal. Great to have you, all of us, with us. And I am personally looking forward to a very stimulating conversation, a very stimulating presentations by each one of you. So, with this, I hand over to Dr. Ajay Kumar. The floor is all yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manish Dabade. Uh, it's a pleasure to be here and to share some ideas on budget 23-24 for defense. It's a pleasure to be here with Lieutenant General Khandare, my former colleague and a very dear friend, as well as Commodore Mukesh Bhargav, who was also a great partner with us while I was in the Defense Ministry. And of course, all the other colleagues, thank you for joining us. All the young students who are here as part of this webinar. When we are looking at the defense budget, it's important to recognize that the defense budget is a continuation of the reform process which has been started in defense sector in the last 3 years, and several of the steps that have been taken in the budget this year actually reflect the same continuity and further consolidation of in that direction. Let me first of all talk about the major reform which was done last year, which was the start of the Agniveer scheme. And because the number of Agniveers that are going to come in large numbers, and their training uh, curriculum is quite different from the curriculum which the traditional recruits used to undergo, because Agniveer's curriculum has been compressed and a lot more people will have to be trained over a short period of time. There was need to have additional training infrastructure for these Agniveers, and therefore I see that government has provided necessary funding for adequate training infrastructure for these Agniveers. Similarly, there is a provision for a very attractive exit welfare fund for the Agniveers, where government contributes in equal amount as the contribution of the Agniveers themselves, and there are certain other benefits as well. Government has formally constituted that fund and also made it what they call as EEE, so exempt at all levels. The second big reform which has been going on in the last few years has been the reform of Atmanirbharta. The modernization of armed forces. Our honorable Prime Minister has always emphasized the fact that, as long as we are dependent on imported arms and equipment, we can never hope to be getting the best technology from the world. No one ever gives you the best technology. And the second challenge is whatever you get from through import is never unique, because the same item can also be given to your adversary and the advantage is neutralized. And therefore, it is imperative for a strong and army to be a self reliant army. And in this direction, the steps towards Atmanirbharta in defense are reflected in terms of both the capital budget increase and the revenue budget increase. Now, when I say revenue budget, we must realize a lot of revenue items which are procured by the armed forces today are being procured from the industry. So both, and there has been always a demand for a significant increase in the revenue budget. You mentioned about the tensions across the LAC. To ensure that the operational readiness of our armed forces is not compromised in any respect, we see a significant increase in the revenue budget, which is one of the highest that one has seen in the last several years, which will, on one side, give boost to our domestic industry for meeting the requirements, as well as also improve the operational preparedness. On the capital side, again, we see an increase in the capital budget. And mind you, since 2020 onwards, we have started a process where a certain part of the capital budget is earmarked for domestic industry only. In 2021, it was 58%. And 2021-22, this was increased to 64% of the budget. And in 22-23, this was increased to 68% of the budget. And this year, I'm quite hopeful that the trend is continuously increasing, so that our industry is getting more and more share of the budget. So there are two levels of increases that the domestic industry, the Atmanirbharta component, will see. One is due to the increase in the capital budget, and second is also due to the increase in the percentage of the total capital budget which will be earmarked for the domestic industry. The third important change in thinking which has come in the current government's regime is with respect to the treatment of the borders. In the past, there has been a thinking that we should keep our borders uh, underdeveloped, do not develop infrastructure that will prevent the enemy from getting into our area. We have found that things have changed. Our northern neighbor has extensively and comprehensively improved the infrastructure on his side of the LAC. And in the last 2 3 years, government has given a lot of emphasis on the development of border on the Indian side. And there was exponential increase in the budget in the last 2 years, and we see this trend continuing, where the budget for BRO has been increased again from 3,500 crores to 5,000 crores, nearly 45% growth, which is huge by any standards. The fourth major reform which has been taken, or fourth, is with respect to the veterans. The government had announced OROP, and the second installment of OROP was due. That was released some months back, and this budget provides for continued provisions in the pension with the increased OROP level, and that has been provided for. Uh, there are lot of other measures which are, you mentioned about IDEX. I want to say that we need to see this budget in totality. We should not only look at the demand for grants in demand 19, 20, 21, which have the title of Ministry of Defense on top of it. Since IDEX is such an important part of our Atmanirbharta campaign, and startups are such an important part of our Atmanirbharta campaign, We must also look at how this budget is supporting the startups. And the finance minister has provided several incentives, and these are in continuation or over and above the incentives that were given to the startups in the past. One of the things is that the tax exemption for startups, which was available up to for the startups which was starting before 31 3 to 2023, this has now been extended for one more year, which means all new startups which will be started will continue to get exemption, income tax exemption as well. And that should be very good news for more startups to come under IDEX. The second thing is that because startups do not start giving you profit from the very first year, the rollover of losses, which was available up to 7 years, has now been extended up to 10 years. And that will be again good news for, especially in defense. We know that there is a lead time before a startup is able to develop the new technology, get it tested, prototype developed, get it, procurement process starts, procurement takes place, and all of these measures take time. And therefore it is quite possible that the startup will continue to run into losses for several of these years. And therefore this measure, I think, is also something which is very useful for defense startups. And third, which she has mentioned, is the number of officers, and the appeals against income tax assessments will be speeded up. I think that will also be a great news. There is also measures with respect to data governance uh, and centers of excellence in artificial intelligence. I think these two are particularly interest to the defense sector, as particularly with respect to Atmanirbharta. The data governance will enable, today, the kind of artificial intelligence tools and solutions that we can generate are primarily dependent on the quantum and the quality of data that uh, uh, the user or the developer has access to. And there are constraints because of privacy. The data governance policy will provide for suitable anonymization framework, which will thereby enable that data will now be available with large number of startups and companies who can come up with AI tools which will be useful for defense. And we must appreciate the fact that we are today in a world where it is not necessary that defense technologies are those which are developed by defense industries only. Today a lot of non-defense industry comes up with technologies which are thereafter uh, incorporated in defense. So overall I think this is a very strong budget in defense, for industry in general, and its consequent benefits for defense sector will also be felt. So I think this is a consolidation period for defense industry, and I see every reason how this budget is going to support this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay Kumar. I think you have really set the ball rolling with your keynote address. Very importantly, I think the point which we all should get it right, that this is really a continuity, a continuum of sorts, and it is a continuity of defense reforms. In fact, you rightly point out that how you should see it as reflecting continuity and, in fact, consolidation of the defense reforms initiated, especially after 2014. And the very important point which you flagged for all of us to grapple with also is the question of Atmanirbharta, and how it is so important to have a self-reliant army, looking at the diverse threats, very significant threats which we see on a northern front, but also on the western borders. Very important point about I think that is what is being also reflected in the defense budget, which you also shared, is the treatment of borders. I think that that is a very quantum. I mean, in terms of not just the budget allocation, but it shows it is really a reflective of thinking, a changed thinking about looking at borders and their significance. Also the question about veterans, about data governance. I think you really flagged these very important considerations, which have been incorporated in the defense budget. Thank you very much, sir. It was truly a very fascinating and a very comprehensive overview of the defense component of the budget. With this, I now request Lieutenant General Khandari, sir, to make his present his remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Manish Davade, and thanks a lot to the organizers for choosing this topic, which is quite relevant today. And it is outlining the trajectory of how our defense, the overall defense, is going to move ahead. And my gratitude to Dr. Ajay Kumar for having spoken kind words about me. And uh, for the audience, it is important to understand that Dr. Ajay Kumar has been at the helm of these reforms. It is his thinking which has brought in so many changes in the last 1 year. And prior to that, he was in the defense production where he understood everything, what is needed. You know, there are actually four corners of the square where the transformation process is. One is the user, the second is the scientist, the third is the person who's decision maker, and Dr. Ajay Kumar was one of the figures there. And the final one is the investor, whether it is from the government or whether it is from the private sector. In this last, era of couple of years, what Dr. Ajay Kumar was able to bring in is to simplify processes and to bring in trust of the startups, the innovators, the brilliant minds who otherwise were being poached by foreign entities. He was able to bring in this IDEX and a lot of push, and especially at a time of 75 years of independence, where in the last, a couple of months before he retired, he was able to push a lot into the AI. He was able to push a lot into the naval domain and the space sector also. These are only three which I am mentioning. There are many more. Now, this follow-on budget which came up further consolidated the thought process of the private sector as well as the young minds that the government's intent is very clear. I'm not wanting to speak about the budget per se, but what we need to do to ensure that we make fruitful utilization of this budget. Defense sector and the defense ministry is not a single ministry which deals with the defense of the country. There are multiple ministries who have share of their budget which is utilized by the defense directly or indirectly. I'll give you an example. The Ministry of Road and Transport, Ministry of Railways, the MIT, the Environment Ministry. There are so many, Ministry of Space, Science and Technology. They are all the ones whose budget also contributes to the capability enhancement of overall defense of the country. So when you are looking at the defense budget, please also look at the other budgets. And what has been the hallmark in the last couple of years is interministerial collaboration. If roads are required in the forward areas, the border roads, you see the hike that has come in the budget. In addition to that, the other ministry as well as the state governments who have to contribute to creating infrastructure ahead. The Prime Minister said that you will not call these villages which are on the borders as the last village. We should call them as the first village. Your attitude shift has to happen. So when we are trying to consolidate our borders, especially against China, they have a series of about 600 villages. Now, this present government, going beyond the budget of Ministry of Defense, is also looking towards connectivity twofold. Firstly, the road connectivity, rail connectivity, and secondly, the digital connectivity. A large amount has been promised and has already been spent onto digital connectivity of the border areas. And in this budget also you see that your forward villages, the first villages along the border, they have to remain populated. China is populating the forward areas, and our emphasis has been to keep the villages populated. They were already populated, but somehow they are getting depopulated, which is not a good sign. So this particular budget also aims at that, but this amount is distributed into various heads, whether it is of the center, whether it is of the states. There is a lot of optimization which has been a part of this reform process, which Dr. Ajay Kumar mentioned. And he has been also pushing for common bridges, common tunnels. You have a tunnel which is coming up in the forward area, which is constructed by uh, the roads, and there is another one parallel which is for the railways. Why can't we do it together? And by doing that, we are able to create more tunnels and more bridges. So that is one interministerial optimization. By having many ministries talking together across the table, whether it is MEA, MOD, the other ministries which I mentioned, the time delays and cost overruns are being reduced. I remember Dr. Ajay Kumar used to conduct meetings of the MEA and look at how we can export. So if we are looking at more production in-house here in India, there will be limits in India. So the process of exports has to be speeded up, and that is what is the ongoing process. Uh, Agniveer is what was mentioned. One major thing which has come up is the sequence of selection. So far, we used to have a number of recruitment rallies all over, and a lot of teams used to go out and reach out in the remote areas. Now, this time we have said, okay, let's start at the written examination first, and thereafter the physical part screening. Even that speeds up, gets us better quality, and also reduces the expenditure. Optimizing by the users is important. The revenue expenditures, especially a lot of electricity that we are utilizing, is more or less non-productive. But if we shift to renewable energy, then the services will have a large amount of money that they will save, which they can utilize for fruitful gains. Uh, One more issue that was in the reform process that has been ongoing is the fast track emergency procurement. So far, free hand had been given to the users to get the best in the world. Thereafter, a gradual shift has happened where the indigenous industries have been prioritized, that they will be the ones who will provide products for fast track procurement under the emergency procurement process. The indigenization of these products has also brought in a lot of enthusiasm and an attitudinal shift amongst the users as well as the people who are in the decision making. There is one small little thing which will again have to be brought is the financial processing. I think in those corridors, if the processes get speeded up, this utilization of the present high amount of allocation of budget will get speeded up. Uh, we have to focus on our adversary across, that is on the north. They are going at a great speed. We have to at a greater speed than them. We have to bring in technology at a greater speed, and the budget shows the intent. I think collaboration is what is required. Signaling by the government has been done in the DEF Expo, which took place in October. The Ministry of Defense, under the Defense Secretary, took a very big step that only Indian industries would be setting stalls. And if foreign companies have to come, they have to come as ventures with an Indian partner with a major stake. That was another good measure that is. And now the budget in the maritime and space sector, which are especially important, there are multiple countries involved in this. And I think those budgets also have to be seen alongside, and we will realize that, especially in the maritime domain, there are 10 or 11 ministries which look at the maritime domain. So the requirement is to also look at those budgets, and we will find the government intent under various heads, but for one common cause, that is the security of the nation, is what is prime in the minds of the government. As regards Agniveer scheme, one more point which I wanted to mention is the benefits after the skilling and after the attitudinal shift of these youngsters. Whatever number of youngsters go out in civil street, they will have jobs immediately available, which will be taken care of by the private sector or even the public sector. In addition, at a larger macro level, currently we have a problem of reservists in the age bracket that we need. But Agniveer scheme in the next 10 years will give us a huge number of capable, energetic, young reservists. You look at what is happening on the Russia-Ukraine front. The old adage that we will have swift, short, intense conflict. It's no more like that. It will be intense and it will be a brutal conflict, but it is not going to be short. So we have to look at our technology as well as the human resource towards that. Induction of technology, which has been encouraged in the budget, also brings in a lot of pressure on us to have skilling done. That skilling has to be done in uniformed fraternity as well as in the civilian fraternity. And there is a lot of emphasis there at state level also, at the central level also, to bring in skilling. I think these are my opening remarks, and I would stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Khandare Saab. I think you raised some very importantly, you talked about the focus on looking at the fruitful utilization of budget. I think that's a very important focus which needs to be borne in mind. And in continuation of what, in fact, Dr. Ajay Kumar had mentioned in his keynote address, that the defense budget is clearly the point you underscored is a reflection of the further consolidation of defense reforms. The other very important point, I think, is, and in fact, you rightly credited that with for Dr. Ajay Kumar, is about the interministerial collaboration. Also, looking at collaboration with the state governments. That's a very important point, which has in fact led and will be leading to more optimization of both resources and utilities. Also, the question about Agniveers, there was lots of media, storm, if one can say so, about Agniveers. But I think the lessons of Russia-Ukraine war have really shown the importance of having a reservist which can be really roped in for any future conflict. Also, in emerging sectors of maritime and space. So, thank you very much. I think it was a brilliant exposition. With this, I now request Commodore Mukesh Bhargava to make his remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Manish, and thanks, Dr. Ajay Kumar and Lieutenant General Khandare, for setting the context with very, very insightful remarks about the defense budget. The way I would like to put some points from the industry perspective also, which probably would be which is not yet covered. If we look at it from the industry perspective, I think it is a growth-oriented budget, and probably setting up, since this is the first budget of the Amrit Kal, which has started, as Prime Minister has very vociferously mentioned, it's setting up the roadmap for taking India to the 5 trillion economy. Uh, 5.94 lakh crores, which is the highest chunk of the government's budget, which is there in the defense. Well, that's a different thing. It was not mentioned in the speech of the finance minister, but that's for various other reasons. Uh, it is a growth of 13% with respect to financial year 23. But what was industry looking at is a little more. And the reason for that was that, as was mentioned by Dr. Manish yourself, as well as all the two panelists as well, the challenges that the nation is facing. When I did my staff college way back in 89, we did one exercise which was about uh, two front war that India might face. And we did one, case study for that. And we always thought it is a theoretical exercise. Now that theoretical exercise, after nearly 24 years, has come into reality. And that is, I think, what this budget was, industry was expecting. Uh, almost about 6.5 lakh crore was industry's expectation. So to that extent, I think while it is a big boost, but probably a little more could have been done considering the threats that we are looking at. This is meant for sustenance of the weapons, platforms, ships, submarines, aircraft, logistics, and also to give the boost to the serviceability. And as what Dr. Ajay Kumar mentioned, a continuous thrust on the modernization, which is one of the focus area of the Prime Minister. Uh, well, if you look at the capital budget, it is just about 1.62 lakh crore out of the 5.94. 68% of the budget is for revenue. So when we're talking about modernization, when we're talking about the growth and talking about the Atmanirbharta for defense equipment manufacturing, we are talking about just about 1.62 lakh and not 5.94. So this is one part, and I would like to cover a little more about this. Now, if you compare this from FY23, which was 1.52 lakh crore, it is just short of 10,000 crore increase, which is 6.7% of the uh, budget with respect to the previous year. If we adjust it for inflation, which is 6 to 7%, we don't see much increase into the capital budget. And the reason for that is very obvious. There are We are just coming out of the pandemic. There are challenges. There are financial headwinds. There are global problems. There are supply chain issues. The government is grappling with multifarious issues, and I think this is the best that they could do. Well, it falls short of the industry's expectation, at least for the capital budget. Revenue budget, as what Dr. Ajay Kumar very rightly mentioned, has seen a big boost from 62.4 thousand crore to 90,000 crore, which is almost about 44% increase. And I think this was needed also because if we have to maintain our operational capability and war fighting capability, then the petrol, fuel, ammunition that is required at the two front, with both the fronts being live more or less round the year, that was well expected, and it has come on that those lines. It would also be used for filling up the gaps in the combat readiness and the combat capability of the three services. I would like to touch also upon the R&D budget. R&D budget is also seen an increase, which is about 9%, and it is now about 23,000 crore. But what is important is, and I think Dr. Ajay Kumar touched upon that, a big portion of this 23,000 crore, in fact, government has very clearly stated 25% of the R&D budget would be available to the industry. I think this is a path-breaking and a stellar initiative, really to give boost to the startup innovators and the people who would like to, take it to the next level. And when we talk about Atmanirbharta, I think the army chief has said we can't win war with imported equipment, and Dr. Ajay Kumar very rightly mentioned the Prime Minister is very, very clear that if we buy equipment, we would always be getting equipment which is made for some other country. India has, when we were making specifications for procurement of equipment, and we used to write from minus 45 to plus 55, some of the foreign OEMs said, where does this kind of a temperature range exist? Actually, it does not exist anywhere in the world except in India. Because if you look at the Pokhran and if you look at Saichin, both these temperatures, and the same equipment is to be used at both places. So this peculiarity, which the Prime Minister has realized, I think the first leader of the country has realized that part, and he said that there is no option but to develop indigenous equipment. And under Dr. Ajay Kumar's leadership, a lot of initiatives have been taken. I will touch upon two of them, IDEX and the DTIS. IDEX allocation of 116 crore, which is an increase of nearly 93%, is a huge boost. But I would expect that this is not a limitation. This is just an allocation. And if there is required, there would be more funds that would be made available. Likewise for the defense testing infrastructure. Because once you develop an equipment, it can't be put to operational use unless it is tested and qualified. And for testing of the defense equipment, there are capital intensive infrastructure that is required. So government under Dr. Ajay Kumar's leadership has realized that and issued a policy which is called Defense Testing Infrastructure Scheme. And I think the state governments are taking that initiative, and 45 crores have been allocated, which is also an increase of 95%. These two initiative itself, I think, are music to the ear of the startups and the innovators, and it would unleash the animal spirit of innovation R&D by the academia and the startups. And I think one very important aspect that Dr. Ajay Kumar touched upon is the creation of the national data governance policy. So when we talk about startups, people cannot develop a defense equipment without having the database that is required for the specifications. And I think that was under a very, very strict control regime. This policy will make that available. And I think the anonymized data will give a further boost to defense startup and the IDEX. The pension budget has seen a huge increase, and I think the reason being the OROP, which has been the second tranche has been given. And but one need to look at this in connection with the Agniveer scheme which has been introduced. Again, a path-breaking change, because after 4 years, we will see a huge decline in this pension budget. And I think that would make more funds available for what I was looking for is the capital budget. BRO has been mentioned, increase of almost 43% to 5,000 crore. And I think General Khandare touched upon the Sela tunnel, the Chabrela tunnel, and Nachipat tunnel, which are the key infrastructure required for if we have to be combative and competitive in the LAC field. Capital budget, it's I would like to touch upon this, which is very, very crucial for attaining the Atmanirbharta. And defense manufacturing, we need to counter not only challenges by China and Pakistan, but also we have to look at the infrastructure which is required for combating these challenges. A little mention about the defense exports. I think again, a huge initiative. I was personally involved with Dr. Ajay Kumar in formulating some of the export policies. The result of that is for all to see. 21-22, we had 1,520 crores of export, and 22-23, it is 12,800. 800% increase in the defense export. And I think it is not stopping there. The initiative and the slew of measures that have been taken would take it to the next level. PLI scheme is something that the industry was looking at. It has been given for the drones and the drones component. I would have liked this to be extended to the counter drone system also. We are seeing the kind of incursions on both sides that are happening on the east and the western front. And I think that is part of the drone ecosystem should get extended, the PLI, to also the anti-drone systems. Now coming back to the capital budget, we are talking about 10,000 crore increase. Part of this budget in the last year, I think close to about 2,000 crore was not spent out of the 152. So one is we must have the policy and the procedures to ensure that what is allocated, that not only that gets spent, we should be looking at spending more if the government is willing. And I think the finance minister has been very, very categoric that these are allocations, and if required, more budgets can be made available. But when we look at 1.62 lakh crores, we have two parts of this capital budget. One is committed liability. Second is new procurement. Almost 85% of this budget would go into committed liabilities, the order that the government has already signed in the past, and there's no option but to continue by paying for those projects. So finally, what is left with the industry for new procurement is just about 15% of this 1.62. And that is why my emphasis was that there we fall probably a little bit short. But when we talk about capital budget, a lot of time the question is being asked, what is the industry doing about their capex? Well, Atmanirbharta, if it is going to come into play, which is already happening, we are seeing all the policy initiative pointing towards that. And both the previous panelists have given enough view to the audience and what is happening in that front. But industry is not lagging behind. If the budgets are there and the orders are being placed, the industry would also bring in their capex, maybe just a quarter down from where the MOD is putting the orders to them. Because my company, Larsen and Toubro, and other private sector companies, they have never ever shied away from investment. We created a shipyard without any order for by investing 2,000 crores. And once the infrastructure was there, the government is committed to come and place orders to you. So capex by industry will not be lacking. And once the system integrators start making those investments, you will also have the tier one, tier two industries that would be coming up. When we got the order for the K9 Vajra, we did just about 25 to 30% in-house. 70% was outsourced to tier one and tier two industries, which brings up an ecosystem of industries within the country, which is going to ultimately lead to the Atmanirbharta across the value chain within the country. Indigenization, of course, is the focus, and there again we come back to maybe a little more of the capex. One recommendation which I would like to leave is when, and this has been discussed, and Dr. Jayakumar is well aware, can we make allocations for defense non-lapsable? And that is, I think, something which has been discussed number of times, but it has not come in the practice. And we need to look at how we can make that happen. If we look at the modernization, I think the budgets for Army, Navy, Air Force are there. Air Force has got the highest 57,000 crore, followed by the Navy 52,000 crore and Army 27,000 crore. But when we look at what is it, we talked about the challenges that because of the China presence into the Indian Ocean region and also creating the ports right from Djibouti to Gwadar to Hanbantota and to Burma, the entire string of pearls in the Indian Ocean is controlled by the Chinese, and they have started putting the SSNs and SSBNs into the Indian Ocean. So there is a need for the Navy to look at not just the aircraft carrier, but also the P-75I and the SSNs, and also the Rafale M, which are expected. Air Force is looking at more Rafales. So whether the 23-24 budgets of that 1.6 to 15% would be adequate to meet all these challenges is something that we need to look at. One part that we need to also see, I think both the panelists have also spoken about the Russia-Ukraine war. 70% of all the three services inventory is Russian equipment. And I think there's a huge challenge that we are facing with regard to the supply chain and the embargo or the sanctions that the Western friends are putting onto our country. Thanks to our prime ministers and the foreign ministers' bold initiatives, we have been able to resist it till now. But I think that is a challenge that one needs to look at. And that again brings up that because of this disruption in the supply chain and the need for Atmanirbharta in the defense equipment, including the supply chain, is cannot be overemphasized. And I think that is where the budget is headed. And I'm sure that as the finance minister mentioned, if there's a need, more budget would be made available. And with those few points, I would like to close my remarks and like to take up any questions. Thank you, Dr. Manish. Over to you.
Thank you, Commodore Bhargava. I think you really gave a very nuts and bolts of the defense budget, and very importantly, I think since the local domestic defense industry is a very important stakeholder, especially with Prime Minister Modi's mission of Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think that you brought out some very interesting points, and also very importantly gave the big picture that how in fact COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine war has also put up increased pressures. Very importantly, I think you rightly flagged out that 25% of the defense R&D budget is going for domestic private industry. That is really a huge very very important focus for the current government. Uh, Superbly, and I think that that is one success story which we need to highlight as India's burgeoning defense exports. I think 800% quantum, that's a huge jump, and I think we need to really capitalize more on that. Very importantly, you also, I think the point about building a Atmanirbharta ecosystem, which really synergizes both the government and the industry. And also the very, I think one of the very important criticisms or in fact suggestions which have been coming, which you also talked at the end, was about the whole question of the non lapsable funds. So maybe we can bring them up in the Q&A. So, but thank you again for really those very illuminating remarks. Since we have very little time to really to continue the conversations, let me just bring it down to just a couple of questions, and maybe each one of you can take a shot at it. First is about the whole point about the military modernization and the capital outlays. There is an increasing commentary that if you buy purchases of multi-role combat aircraft, are these allocations enough? And looking at the dire security situation that is evolving at the borders, what does it mean for those purchases? The number two is looking at new technologies like AI. How does the defense? I mean, what sort of use, or what sort of approach does the government and even the industry have on the emerging AI issue? The other last point, in fact, is about the question of Atmanirbharta. And here I think Commodore Bhargava talked about the industry expectations from the government, but I think we should also hear from Dr. Ajay Kumar and Lieutenant General Khandare. How is the defense establishment, how is the government looking at the expectations from the industry? What has been their experience? And how really, what sort of steps can both take maybe jointly to synergize and really move towards I mean reliable supply chains, especially looking at what happened with COVID and also the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. So with this, we can begin with Dr. Ajay Kumar.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. Let me try to answer the first question with respect to adequacy of budget. I have my own experience has shown that government has always ensured that the requirements of defense are fulfilled, and uh, all the requirements of defense. In fact, I remember when I was defense secretary, finance use secretary called me several times and asked me, do you want, can you take more money, can you spend more money, especially on the capital side. There was never a issue of limitation of budget. So therefore, I don't think that shortage of budget will be a challenge in terms of our defense preparedness. In fact, General Khandare is aware of this. Uh, very often we had to have repeated meetings to be able to exhaust all our capital budget with the services, with all the other users. So I think budget is, with respect to industry, I think the response from the industry and startups has been overwhelming. They have always exceeded the expectations. However, I think the journey of Atmanirbharta is still, only started. There are, lot of things have happened in the last few years. I had opportunity to be part of those, but a lot of things still need to be done. The ease of doing business needs to be further enhanced. We need to have greater trust in our own technologies. And I have absolutely no doubt that the moment we start trusting our technology, the confidence of our industry and startups to take it to further higher levels will continuously improve. Our procurement processes need to be, we have tried very hard to reduce the timeline of procurement, and I think General Khandare mentioned this point. I think we still have to do a lot of work in this regard. The efficiency of procurement needs to be done, and similar, testing infrastructure, because in defense the testing infrastructure is exceedingly costly, and small industry just cannot afford to develop it. And if we want this industry to contribute their might, we have to make available the government testing infrastructure for industry to make use of, whether it is in space, whether it is in defense. And I think this is something which on paper has been agreed to, but very often in practice faces lot of stumbling blocks. So there are a lot of, you know, things which need to be continuously done. And I think if we treat industry not as a vendor but as a partner, that would be in sectors like defense and space. Industry is not merely a vendor, and that is how other countries of the world have shown, you know, because they are actually partners in protecting the sovereignty of your country. And the intensity of commitment of the industry and startups has been no less than anyone in the government. So my own feeling is, I think it is these soft qualitative measures on which we need to take more steps. And then I think the Commodore Bhargav mentioned about export. I think we have seen a lot of increase, but this is tip of the iceberg. We could be one of the leading exporters in the world if we could create this partnership between industry and government. Thank you.
I think that's a brilliant response to the questions, and also I think that shift in approach one can immediately sense that the government is now looking and should in fact be looking towards industry as a partner. I think that is really the key takeaway of this conversation. Thank you, Dr. Kumar, Lieutenant General Khandare. Sir, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Manish. Firstly, you wanted to know about the user's requirement of MRCA, the multi-role combat aircraft. You pointedly asked that question. Let me tell you, these developments in this kind of high-tech equipment takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort, and these are simultaneous developments which are happening, whether it is LCA, LCA one, LCA two, or on our way to AMCA. Recently, you and your audience would have heard of uh, a visit of a delegation, high-powered delegation, which went to USA, where the NSA has spoken, and all of us who are the stakeholders and looking at improving our capabilities have been focused uh, to a very high degree, trying to get an engine which is indigenous. We have spoken to multiple people, and like what initially has been mentioned by Dr. Ajay Kumar, nobody gives you the best. Everyone will give you at least a few notches lower. And that is the reason why we realize that whether it is an engine in the maritime domain, in the land warfare domain, or in the air or even space for that matter, that engine is most important. And it's not only for us. You look around the world, Russians have also been very reluctant to pass on the engine design and the know how to China. And China has been struggling to make its own engines. And that is one reason that when we look at JF-17s manufactured by China, their engines are no match to what the American engines or what the Russian engines are. So, and that is despite China having the propensity of carrying out cyber espionage of designs and drawings and all those things. So it takes time. But all the same, I want to reassure all of you that this is a work in progress. If we made some LCAs, we have learned certain lessons that goes into LCA 1 or 2, and then there are certain lessons out of these which go into AMCA. So it's a continuous process and it takes time. In the meantime, government is quite amenable to filling the voids by seeking strategic partnerships. I don't want to dwell more on that beyond that. And what Commodore Mukesh Bhargav had said about speeding up the maritime capability of SSN and T-75I, obviously the government is again looking at that, and very sensitive issues are discussed, but not to be brought in the open domain. And L&T has been spearheading this movement, and they have a strategic project, and they have the capability, they have capacity today to do it, and that is well known to the apex decision makers. And I'm sure sooner or later that is going to happen at the earliest. What is our capability for AI was the second pointed question which you said. My point here is, and which I have been stressing at every forum, we look at AI as an engine, but where is that is the data. Unfortunately, most of the users are very sensitive and reluctant to part with data, which Commodore Mukesh Bhargav said. unless you give data, how are you expecting things to move forward? And that is where I'm saying there is an attitudinal shift which is required among the users like me, where we say, okay, this data so far has been utilized well, and it can be passed on to the industry to work upon. Without data and without our Indian data, we will not be able to go ahead. What Commodore Mukesh Bhargav said is also about, while he mentioned about Pokhran and Siachen, look at our maritime zone. Our waters are much different from the European waters. The kind of sensors that we need in our waters are totally different. And that is where we need our own indigenous capabilities to be developed. And we have excellent brains. I must tell you here, brilliant minds who are settled in the West, whether it is in Europe or whether it is in USA, brilliant engineers are coming back. They are reaching out. And we are also, in a way, without announcing something what China announced as a 1,000 talent program, we are encouraging these youngsters to come back. Some of them are not so young also, but they have their heart and mind in the right place. And they have been making full use of these IDEX programs, which were spearheaded by Dr. Ajay Kumar. The amount may not be much as stated in the industry. But again, I want to mention one point which Dr. Ajay Kumar used to say, that if he is a nationalist and he's going to commit his money here, we know he will deliver. We don't want people misusing our funds, because we are not a very rich country. So we have to balance between what our achievement should be and what our resources should be. So that is another point about AI and data. I think the bigger challenge is to get our data front right. As far as Atmanirbharta is concerned, in addition to what has been mentioned so far, in the DAP 2020, a new provision was added about leasing. And leasing is a provision where if you take the latest, you are able to study and then you are able to make something better. And that is for the industry also to see that more and more leasing should be encouraged. And once we get leasing, in fact, we are able to procure more number of items. And that has to be studied very carefully. And then we can continue with our designs. The industry's desire to have much more, there is no doubt what we have all been seeing. In fact, once I was speaking to Dr. Ajay Kumar and he said, how do we accelerate the space sector? And I said, sir, we will need funds. And he said, where is the shortage of funds? And I did realize that there is no shortage of funds provided we reach our milestones and benchmarks in time. If we do not achieve benchmarks in time, then there are cost overruns and time overruns, which is not a good signal for all of us. One more point, which in terms of civil military integration, a point which I had missed out earlier. I think for the first time, Dr. Ajay Kumar had issued instructions, and L&T is a beneficiary, and the country is a beneficiary, that in NDC course, we had one of your officer attending the course, and the kind of network that he would have established, you will see the results in the next 5 to 10 years. All these foreigners who come and attend NDC reach their apex level of decision making in their countries. And this is the kind of networking that we want. And I'm sure this is a continuous effort and it's not going to let the country down. Thank you, Manish.
Thanks, sir. Again, very fascinating response to the sets of questions which were being talked about. So the last word now to Commodore Mukesh Bhargava.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. I'm so honored to have the last word in such honors panelist. I have, with regard to your first question, you mentioned about the military modernization. I often say a very old adage: at the birth of a great nation, there are no midwives. A nation becomes great not because of others, but in spite of others. And I think it can't be more true than ever for India today. Everybody, and you read the paper, today's paper, you pick up and you can find the headlines talking about how to pull this nation down. And that is a clear indication that where the country is headed, you are headed for greatness. And nobody can stop us. They will only put roadblocks. And I think when you mentioned about the MMRCA, and I think General Khandare very rightly mentioned about the aero engine. We had almost about 4 or 5 years back, and I think Dr. Ajay Kumar is fully aware, initiated that why can't we have our, the engine which was there, how can we increase its power to 110 kilonewton, which is what is required for the MMRC and MCA. And there are efforts which are there for the, but with the DRDO, I think when we talk about the public-private partnership, the DRDO industry collaboration is one more area which can be taken up. Of course, what is being done with our friends in the US definitely will shorten that process. But the source code and I think the basic know-how to take it to the Mark II to be done also within the country, it has to be developed. The engine has to be developed within the country. Industry has the capability. It only needs the support, and I think that will happen. The second point that you mentioned about the AI, it's not just AI, it's AI, ML, IoT, IIoT, and the whole lot. In my 16 years after I shed my uniform in the corporate, and I think then the Khandari mentioned about the strategic program. We have initiated so many of the various building blocks, which today is known as Industry 4.0. When we implemented it about 10 years back, we didn't know this is IIoT or this is AI. Today, it is being called by that name. So, what I'm trying to say, Dr. Manish, is industry has been having this capability and can build upon that. What is needed is the data and the database. And that is something which, as Dr. Ajay mentioned, the national data policy which has been made. So everything is moving towards that culmination of that nation becoming great. And I think we are, and as Dr. General Khandare mentioned, this is a WIP. This is a work in progress, and we are moving in that direction. EODB, ease of doing business, Dr. Jackman mentioned, I think lot of ground has been covered, and we still have some bits of the unfinished agenda. My point in my 10 minutes that you gave me was to bring out that small part of unfinished agenda, not to say that we have not done. We have done lots, and I think this journey needs to continue. And Atmanirbharta is a reality, and I think we'll achieve it in much shorter time. And all that we need is the confidence of the government, which we have, the confidence of the service headquarters, which we are now getting, which was not there. I am from the Navy, so I can tell you that Navy was the first one to design its own ships and submarines. And now I think the Army and the Air Force also, Army has created the Design Bureau, and the Air Force also under the Maintenance Command is looking at that. General Khandare mentioned about the engine. But all the three services are gradually moving in that direction, and we will, God willing, Bhagwan ki kripa hui, so we will definitely become Atmanirbhar much earlier than what the government is expecting. Industry has got its might and its shoulder on the cog of the wheel. Thank you very much.
Great. So that with this, I think we come to a close of this. I think a very top class conversation. I have personally benefited from hearing all the very stimulating presentations and really bringing out how, in fact, I think the key takeaway is that this defense budget is really shows the vision, the trajectory of Prime Minister Narendra Modi of making India and this, achieving the mission of Atmanirbharta, especially in the defense sector. And what, in fact, has come out very importantly is how the government and the industry, in fact, are really joining hands and creating synergies, cutting across various domains. It can be the production, it can be the innovation, R&D. I think that is a very important a takeaway from today's webinar. So I really want to thank each one of you, Dr. Ajay Kumar, Lieutenant General Khandare, and Commodore Bhargav sir. Each one of you really have enlightened us, and in fact, I have personally benefited from. I mean, sitting in academia, we do not realize that I mean, working at the front lines and working in the government, to what extent that is in fact challenging, but also shaping policies in a big way, which Khandari sir has been saying repeatedly, that we are going to see it in next 5 years, 10 years. The results will be there to really see. So really thank you, and I really want to thank each one of you who have joined us on our live stream on different social media. and looking forward to have much more conversations like these, but especially with these three really, really top minds on defense. So thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Uh,
Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now I request Miss Gayatri Joshi ma'am to propose a vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, honorable dignitaries, CHME Society officials, and dear participants. On behalf of Central Hindu Military Education Society's Kanoji Angre Maritime Research Institute, I, Assistant Professor Gayatri Joshi, present you a vote of thanks. I am thankful for making us aware and educate the viewers regarding the very sensitive, important defense budget and very sensitive issue about defense budget 2023 for defense ministry and defense industry. I am immensely thankful to Dr. Manish Dabhade sir, today's keynote speaker, Dr. Ajay Kumar, today's speaker, Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare sir, Commodore Mukesh Bhargava sir, for educating us. Your views will definitely help us to understand the allocation of defense budget. With this, I would like to extend my gratitude towards CHME Society's working president, Pramodji Kulkarni sir, our general secretary, Dr. Dilipji Belgaonkar sir, director of Kamari, Captain Shripad Naravane sir, and all CHME officials, as well as our participants, Dr. Uh, as well as I am extending my vote of thanks to Principal Dr. Dinesh Naik sir, Head of Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Dr. Ramesh Raut sir, for their support. Last but not the least, let me thank Mr. Tanmay Dikshit sir and whole team of Cyber Sanskar for their technical support. In the end, thank you all the viewers, teachers, and students for being with us. Thank you, Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Jai Hind.
Yeah, and thank you.
Thank you.
Jai Hind, thank you.